Okay, today we're going to look at three terms with a coefficient. So 5.2 didn't have a coefficient. And so what I mean by that is all of these today have a number sitting out front. And so if it has a number in front, then there's two things that can happen, and we're going to show you both of them. But the first thing you always want to check for is a common factor. If it has a common factor, then you always want to do that first because you won't get the correct answer if you don't. I'll kind of explain that a little bit more. So you first check for a common factor, and if it doesn't have a common factor, then we're going to do what I call multiply, divide, reduce. Again, that's not mathematical terms, that's just an easy way to remember the steps to do it, and I'll explain that here in a minute. So let's look at this first example. So as soon as you see a number in front, you want to see if you can factor it out. So you say, will 5 divide into 10? Yes. Will 5 divide into 15? Yes. So this is a problem like we did from 5.1 where we're going to take out that common factor and then divide to see what's left inside. So 5y squared divided by 5 is y squared. 10y divided by 5 is 2y. 15 divided by 5 is 3. So we factored out that common factor. The difference between these and the ones you had 5.1 is now this. So the common factor was like 5.2, but now what we have left is 5.1. What we have left inside is like 5.2. It can continue to be factored. So this 5 comes down, and then we factor what's left by reading it backwards. Factors of 3 that subtract to be 2 would be 3 and 1. My factors of y squared are y and y. First sign comes down. We look up, we're subtracting, so the signs have to be different. And then that's our final answer. So if what you have left over can still be factored, then you want to factor it. This next one, the same thing. As soon as I see a 2 here, I want to ask myself, will 2 go into 14? Yes. Will 2 go into 24? Yes. But I also see this x here. Do you see they also all have an x? So this has a common factor of 2 and an x because they all have those in common. So we're going to factor that out. So 2x to the third divided by 2x is x squared. 14 divided by 2 is 7. X squared divided by x is x. And then plus 24 divided by 2 is 12. And the x cancels. Then we factor what's inside here by reading it backwards. The 2x comes down. We're going to do our 2 parentheses and say factors of 12 that add to be 7 are going to be 4 and 3. So biggest first, smallest second. My letter here is x and x. My first sign comes down. We're adding so the signs are alike. And so that's our answer on those. So if they have a common factor, it's a two-step problem, but it's easier than these we're going to look at next that don't have a common factor. So if it has a common factor, you want to pull it out, but let's look at this next one. 3 won't go into 4. 3 won't go into 1. So it doesn't have a common factor. We can't read it backwards. There aren't factors of 1 that add to be 4, so we can't do it like we did in 5.2. So that's where we're going to follow these steps. Multiply, divide, and then reduce. So you got to follow all of those in order to make sure this works out. So since we can't read it backwards, we're going to take this first number and multiply it times that last number. So we're going to say 3 times 1 is 3, and that's what we're going to look for factors of. Factors of 3, we're still going to read it backwards, that add to be 4. And so my factors of 3 are 1 times 3. Those do add to be 4. So those are the numbers we want to use. So just like we did in 5.2, we're going to go to our parentheses and put largest, smallest. My letter here is p squared, so p and p. First sign comes down. We're adding so the signs are alike. All of that is exactly the same as in 5.2. The problem is this can't be our answer. But what we did is a kind of little cheat method. We multiplied to get our factors, so we're going to undo that by dividing by that 3. Since we multiplied by 3, pen's reading out. Since we multiplied by 3, we have to undo the little cheat and divide by 3. And then you want to reduce those fractions. So this one will become a p minus 1, because 3 divided by 3 is 1. This one won't simplify. 1/3 in simplest form. So when that's the case, the bottom number comes to the front. Here, I'll write that down. And then the bottom number comes to the front. So the 3 comes to the front, making that a 3p minus 1. And that's your answer. Again, especially on your test, check by multiplying it back out. My pen is out there. Let's do this one. So to multiply it back out, you would FOIL. P times P is 3p squared. P times -1 is a -1p. Inside is a -3p. Last is a +1. Those two do add to give you to be that 3p squared minus 4p plus 1. So you'll know you did it correctly. Again, this you don't have to show. And you can kind of do it in your head by thinking -3 and -1 is going to equal -4. And -1 times -1 is +1. If you check, did the middle terms add together and does the last term multiply? Or you can always just FOIL it out and make sure that you get the same answer. Okay, let's try another one. Again, you look for a common factor, but this is like a 1. 6 won't go into any of those. I can't do a common factor, so I'm going to multiply, divide, reduce. So I'm going to say 6 times 1 is 6, and that's what I want factors of. Factors of 6 that subtract to be 1. We're still reading it backwards right here. So my factors of 6 are 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. Which ones subtract to be 1 would be 2 and 3. So I go to my parentheses, largest, smallest, R and R. We're just looking at what letters there. You won't have that in this class, but going forward you might have an R4 and you just split it to be R2, R2. But in this class it's always going to be an R squared. First sign comes down. We look up, we're subtracting, so the signs have to be different. If this one's plus, this one has to be minus. Okay, but that's not your answer. R times R doesn't equal 6R squared. So because we multiplied by 6, we have to divide by 6. And that's why I always circle it. I started that a long time ago just to make my brain go back to that 6, because you use it to multiply, but then you also use it to divide. And then just don't forget, you have to reduce those fractions. So in this first one, 3/6, 3 will go into both of those, making that a 1/2. Bring down the next part. 2/6, 2 will go into both of those, making a 1/3. So see, we're using what we learned from that first week. That's the bad thing about math. You have to remember every single thing. And then this won't reduce, so this bottom number goes to the front of that parentheses, and this bottom number goes to the front of that parentheses. So your final answer is a 2R plus 1 and a 3R minus 1. And that's your answer. But again, if you want to check it, let's multiply it back out. 2R times 3R is 6R squared. 2R times -1 is a -2R. 1 times 3R is a plus 3R. And +1 times -1 is a -1. Those will add together, leaving you 6R squared plus 1R minus 1. So we know we did it correctly. Okay, let's look at one more. This one's getting a little bit harder. Again, first check for a common factor. Like 8 and 14 both have 2 in common, but 2 won't come out of 3. So if this was a 6, we would have a common factor. But since it's not, we can't take out the common factor. So we're going to take this first number 8, and we're going to multiply it times that last number 3. So 8 times 3 is 24. And I want factors of 24 that add to be 14. Again, if you know what the answer is, keep going. But if you don't, remember you can get all your factors. We talked about this previously by listing out your numbers and then dividing. 24 divided by 1 is 24. 24 divided by 2 is 12. 24 divided by 3 is 8. 24 divided by 4 is 6. And you could keep going, but you see 5 won't work, and then 6 starts repeating. So once it starts repeating, you'll know you have all your factors. For this one, we want the ones that add to be 14. So that would be 2 and 12. So we're going to go to our parentheses. Largest, smallest. Oh my gosh, that's a W. It's supposed to be a W2. I don't know why I put a 3 there. Sorry, W3 wouldn't work. That's why I knew it was a mismatch. So it should be 8W squared. So our factors of W squared are W and W. First sign comes down. We look up, so we're adding, so the signs have to be alike. So we factored it. But again, that's not our answer because we multiplied by 8. We have to divide by 8 and then reduce those fractions. So the first one, bring down the W minus, 12/8, 4 would go into both of those, leaving a 3/2. And on the second one, 2/8, 2 would go into both of those, leaving a 1/4. And then that bottom number comes to the front. So the 2 is going to move up here, and the 4 is going to move up there. And so this becomes a 2W minus 3 and a 4W minus 1. And again, you can multiply that back out to make sure that it works. So do check your answers, especially on your test. If you made a mistake, it's usually in reducing. Either you divided by the wrong number, so remember you divide by the number in front, and then just be sure you reduced your fractions. And if you didn't, that's usually the problem there. So this is multiplying 3 terms with a coefficient. I do want to say there's a lot of different methods. There's a grouping method. A lot of teachers teach trial and error. They just tell you to you think in your brain and start plugging things in until it works. But for so many people, especially kids that have had developmental math, that's why they're in developmental math, is their brain doesn't just figure it out. And so this method works perfectly in that the math in it's all really easy. You're just multiplying and reducing is really all you're doing, and thinking through those methods. So if you get up into college algebra, a lot of times the professors will just skip how they did it. They'll just factor it and keep going, and you're like, wait, how'd they get that? Well, they probably factored in their head, but just know that you can come back and factor it this way and get the same answer. Even if you have to just go off to the side on a piece of scratch paper to graph it and to factor it and bring it back, you can. Just know that some people can look at this and just factor it in the brain. Most people can't, so this is just a little trick to factor it out. So if you have another method that you like, you're definitely welcome to use it. And so now you're ready to work the practice problems from 5.3.